Welcome back to Copper Star Precision, the channel dedicated to getting you more points at your competitive shooting matches. Today we're going over the NRL22 November 2023 Course of Fire. This is stage 3 and the booklet is called Opening Day. This might be a little bit of a longer video, but I promise I'm going to give you some tips and tricks and strategies that are going to make your life easier and hopefully give you a bunch of different options to fit your shooting style so that you can get the maximum amount of points. Make sure you're subscribed down below because I'm putting out a video every day this week leading up to the first matches this weekend. And hopefully they help you score more points. With that being said, we have a lot to cover. So let's go over the stage description and we'll talk about strategy. Stage description is as follows. On the start signal, you'll take a position on top of one of the props, either the 5-gallon bucket or the sawhorse, and engage far to near with one shot each. You will then change props and engage the targets in the same order. You will continue engaging targets in this sequence and alternating props until 10 shots have been fired or time expires. The use of a tripod as rear support is optional. If used, it will be fully deployed prior to the clock starting. The restriction on the tripod is that if you use the tripod as optional equipment, the competitor must start with it in hand. In hand, but it's fully deployed. So we basically have 2 props, optional tripod use. I'll put the target sizes down here. It looks like we have for option 1 an 2-inch at 84 yards and a 3-inch at 97 yards. My dope for those happens to be just about 1 and 1.6 for the far target. So we have a lot of decisions to make, and I'm going to give you a checklist that if you complete in your head mentally, or even write it down what your strategy is going to be before the stage starts, it's going to make your life a lot easier because there's so much going on in the stage. We're alternating, tripod, gear. Do I use holdovers? Not. So let's talk about kind of how the stage is laid out and that checklist. Okay, so point number 1, we're alternating between props. There's only 10 shots, so we're going to use one prop 3 times and one prop 2 times. So you need to decide which prop am I more stable on, more comfortable with. That's where I want to start because I'll be alternating back and forth and ending on that same prop. So I'm taking 6 shots from one prop and 4 shots from another. So for me, in my checklist, I am more stable on the 5-gallon bucket because it's lower to the ground for me, lower center of gravity, lets me get a little bit more stable position. I'll talk about what position to take on the bucket, but for me, 5-gallon bucket's more stable. So checklist number 1, I'm going to start on the 5-gallon bucket and then go to the sawhorse. Question number 2, do I dial for each target or do I hold over? Because there's so much movement and you'd be dialing each time, far target than near target, I would recommend holdovers. If you're a new shooter, I do recommend dialing for each target because it's a little bit easier just to point crosshairs at a target and try and guesstimate the wind call that you need. That being said, if you're a more experienced shooter, I think holdovers are going to be your friend here. I think this will be a tough stage to dial for every target, just given the time constraints. So checklist item number 2, holdovers for me. It might be different for you. Checklist number 3, gear. So gear is going to also kind of depend on whether or not we use the tripod, which is checklist number 4, but we'll get into that in a second. As far as gear goes, obviously wedge-shaped bags are definitely advantageous to use on things like this. If your sawhorse looks like this with a kind of a thin top, some sort of wedge-shaped bag, this is the pint-sized sticky game changer from Armageddon Gear. I like to use that, get a good purchase on here, nice flat thing to lay the rifle, and then you can carry this with you if you want. On the bucket, I would turn this sideways to give me a nice flat surface here. I wouldn't keep it with the wedges up. This is a little bit less stable, so turn it sideways on here. If you have a sawhorse that has a wider top, you can also put it sideways here. If you're going to go with the wedge bag and you're going to be moving this back and forth, that's going to kill time on the clock. So if you have another wedge bag or some other type of bag, you might consider something like that. So I might have these 2 wedge bags at the start, or I borrow one from a squad mate. And what I would do is I would simply come down here, put that one sideways, and then put this one over the sawhorse like this. And now I don't have to worry about moving the bags, I'm just moving the rifle. So those are a couple gear options there. This pump pillow is down here because in this position, I do like to kind of take a kneeling position. And I like to kind of fill in the space here with the pump pillow. Just for me, it's a little bit more stable. That's definitely an option. Also, what position do you get behind the 5-gallon bucket? I think it's a little too tall for prone when we have the 2-gallon bucket. I think prone is appropriate. But here, having a pump pillow like this, or even one of the Coltac fat bags as rear support is definitely going to be 2 points of contact, definitely more stable. And I take a low kneeling position here. If you're more comfortable, you could take a seated position, something like this. But then remember, because we're transitioning, you're going to have to break out of the seated position and then transfer over. So it's a little bit more work versus if you're kneeling, you come off the kneel, you kind of scoot over and get on the second prop. What I end up doing on these kinds of stages, because getting into checklist item number 4, going to be using the tripod, is I would have a flat bag on my rifle. That way, this flat bag travels with the rifle, has a nice purchase on the 5-gallon bucket, nice stable platform here. Again, I'll be using pump pillow to take up some of that rear support. And because we can use the tripod, normally this would not be super stable because it doesn't really wrap over the sawhorse, top of the sawhorse. Because we're going to use rear support in the tripod, which I'll show you in a second, for me it's going to be most stable. So that's what I'm going to do. Hopefully I gave you some options that fit the gear that you have and your style of shooting. Now, the next part is tripod use, yes or no. It is fully deployed. You have to be holding it at the start of the stage. And there's a couple options with the tripod. Do we use the tripod and for rear support, and do we use it on both props? And for me, in my mental checklist, I think it's going to be too cumbersome to manage the tripod between the props on the clock. And the idea with the tripod is, I've made videos about this before, but it's kind of a new prop to the NRL22. So for those of you who are new here, 1, thank you for watching these videos, and 2, let's talk about how to use a tripod as rear support. So, starts fully deployed in your hand. I'm going to plop it down here. Basically, I make a thumbs up, and with that thumbs up, I grab one of the legs of the tripod that's closest to me, and the butt of the rifle, stock or chassis or whatever, goes inside that sort of thumbs up. So, lays right in there. And what happens is, I come around the tripod leg to engage with my trigger hand. The butt of the rifle stock is in here, and this is rear support. I can slide this up or down for elevation control, but usually it gives me 2 points of contact, very secure. Now, if you're gonna move the tripod between props, that's where things get a little tricky. So you wanna grab the tripod, you can drag it this way, but if you try and push it, the legs will collapse, right? So if you're gonna push, so dragging is one thing. If you're gonna push, you need to lift, move, and then place. So lift up if you're pushing away from you, you probably can get away with dragging if you're pulling it towards yourself. However, that's, again, a lot of gear to manage in the clock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the tripod, but only for the sawhorse. So that's kind of my mental checklist. Let's go over it one more time. Which one do I want to start on? Which prop do I feel more comfortable with? For me, it's a 5-gallon drum. What gear do I want to use? I'm using a flat bag and tripod for rear support and pump pillow for rear support down here on the 5-gallon drum. Am I using holdovers or am I dialing? I'm holding over. Am I using the tripod? Yes. Am I using tripod for both props? No, I'm only using it for the sawhorse. So that's kind of like my mental checklist and my strategy for the stage. Again, yours might be different. Hopefully I've shown you a little bit of different options on what might work for you. So what would a stage actually look like? Let's go with what I said I was gonna do. All right. So I've got the rifle, tripod in hand, timer goes beep. I'm gonna leave this over here, put this straight down here. Remember, it's the far target first. I've got the pump pillow for rear support. Come down the rifle far target first. We're holding over 0.5 mils for me. Engage, find the near target, straight up, engage. I'm gonna come over here. Now, here's another thing that's gonna save you time. Depending on how it's set up, I'm going to limit the movement. So I'm not going to go all the way over to the right side of the sawhorse. I'm going to go pretty close. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to go maybe in line with one of the legs. And I'll tell you why it's important in a second. So here we've got, I'm over the leg. And what this is going to do is going to create a reference point. And then I'm going to, again, make a thumbs up, drag the tripod over here, find this, rear support, find the far target, engage 0.5 mil, find the near target, engage straight up. Now I'm going to leave this here, and I've made a mental note of the reference point. I'm over this left leg of the sawhorse. So when I return, I don't have to move this. It's going to be right there waiting for me. So we're going back to the 5-gallon bucket. Grab the pump pillow, kneeling position, find the far target, hold a 0.5, near target straight up. Now we're going right back to where we were, and I have that reference point. I'm right here over the leg, and look at that, boom. Really quick transition, even though I was talking through it. I mean, that's a pretty quick. It's already right there. So, I mean, try not to bump this or anything, but having that reference point and leaving the tripod here is going to have me right on target pretty quick. So that's why I don't suggest moving it back and forth between the props. So that was kind of a lot to cover. This is one of those stages where coming up with a plan beforehand, extremely important. So let me know down in the comments what you're planning to do for your checklist. Are you starting on the 5-gallon drum or the sawhorse? Are you holding over or are you dialing? What gear are you gonna use? Are you gonna use the tripod? If you so, are you gonna use it on both props or just one? I gave my personal opinion about how I would run this stage. Hopefully it works for you, but again, do what feels right to you, what you're most comfortable with, and I hope that you score the maximum number of points on this stage. Definitely a doozy, but if you come in with a plan, you're gonna do great. Let me know how you do at the match, and until I see you next time, score more points.